So I'm Milica Hinic, back with you today on our Student Learning Podcast Experience, a podcast about a podcast. Thank you for joining us today's talk with Dr. Selina Mudavanhu. So Selina Mudavanhu is an assistant professor in the Department of Communication Studies and Media Arts at McMaster University. She holds a PhD in Media Studies from the Center for Film and Media Studies at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. Dr. Mudavanhu's interests are in critical media studies, critical race theories, decolonial studies, social media, and the politics of representation and framing, media audiences, and digital storytelling. Welcome, Dr. Mudavanhu.
Thank you so much for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your research through digital storytelling?
My research has two pillars that are interlinked. One looks at critically deconstructing meanings that are embedded in mainstream media discourses. I also look at digital storytelling. In digital storytelling, I facilitate spaces in which ordinary people use everyday tools that they have to tell stories about their lives, about their experiences. I convene storytelling workshops with racialized students, with Black students. It's quite interesting. And recently, I proposed a course in my own department on digital storytelling. So I look forward to teaching storytelling next year.
Wow, that's fascinating work and research, really meaningful. It's an expressful outlet to share your story with others and to provide that knowledge to the public and to bring more awareness to important issues.
Why I love storytelling is it centralizes the storyteller, the ordinary person. You don't need to be trained in communication or media studies to be able to tell your own stories. Everyone has got a story, and most people have technologies that they use every day. And people are already using technologies to tell stories anyway. They take pictures and they show families and friends, and so it's almost, if you want, a version of a photo voice type digital storytelling. So people are already doing this. And so digital storytelling is just being intentional about bringing what people are already doing in a formalized space. If you are thinking about research in the traditional sense, the power really lies with the researcher, because they decide how to interview somebody, what to include in the write-up, and so on. And if you're also thinking about media production in the traditional sense, it's the trained journalist that goes and interviews people. They decide which sound bites are the most important to include in reports. So the power really lies with the researcher or the journalist. But in storytelling, we are prioritizing ordinary people to select and choose stories they want to tell about themselves, about their lives at particular moments in time. So imagine you're watching a National Geographic documentary where the lion is about to attack a defenseless small zebra. You almost cringe and you get all sorts of emotions running through your body, what happens? You have just moved from being a spectator into being engaged with the kinds of content you're seeing on the screen. And so that aspect is very, very important, particularly if you're doing activist work. When you see something on screen, stories on screen, you are translated from just being a spectator and you begin to empathize and you begin to imagine, what it feels like to be in that body. So the same ways in which a National Geographic documentary will draw you in, the idea is really ordinary people's stories as they describe their experiences, their pain, their struggle, their agency, that audiences are drawn in. So that is why I really love digital storytelling.
Thank you. Your example really drew a perfect picture of how you become engaged with the content presented in front of you, for sure. Mm-hmm. So, to my knowledge, you were at a digital storytelling workshop earlier today. Do you want to let us know a little bit about that?
I just did a storytelling workshop with students at the University of Johannesburg. I'm working with a colleague in the sociology department, Professor Kezia Batisai, and this is an extension of the work that I did this last summer as part of the Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship. So in the digital storytelling workshop, students were interested in the methodology, and part of what I was doing in the workshop is brainstorming with them the potential usefulness of digital storytelling skills for their future post the PhD. So we're talking about how digital storytelling can help them if they get a job in nonprofit organizations as part of knowledge mobilization. Maybe digital storytelling can be a tool they use. We're also talking about if they're going to have academic careers, how digital storytelling can be part of the grant writing they do, and thinking about this as part of knowledge mobilization. So it was quite interesting for me to begin to brainstorm ways digital storytelling can be useful for these students.
Thank you. Yes, that actually answered my follow-up question with the benefits of digital storytelling in educational contexts. So basically, you're trying to brainstorm and work ways around how to utilize it in the real world. What kind of application can you apply digital storytelling to?
Absolutely. So one of the projects that I'm doing at McMaster with Black senior undergraduate students, it's again a digital storytelling project. The project is funded by Petrol Canada. The project invites senior Black students to reflect on their experiences when they just started university. So it is almost giving your younger self advice. What kinds of advice would you give yourself in hindsight? So hindsight is always regarded as 2020. You see things much more clearly, you have more perspective. And so in that project, I'm inviting students to give themselves, their younger selves, advice, but by extension, they are giving incoming students, Black students who are coming into the university, advice. So we are hoping to use these digital stories in orientation programs with incoming Black students who are linked to the Black Student Success Center at McMaster. And we're going to have a big launch of those digital stories during Black History Month, in which we're going to invite the whole university to come and see these stories. The piece about inviting the whole university is doing the work that I mentioned before, drawing audiences in to understand and to empathize. So yes, I always think about the usefulness of digital stories, in addition to, of course, having fun. It's always fun to do digital storytelling.
Thank you. So insightful. You're increasing accessibility and your knowledge mobilizing to the community. It's fantastic. All of this work is fantastic. So let's apply digital storytelling to podcasting. So do you have lectures or lecture content delivered through podcasting and or audio files? Can you tell me your experience with it?
Absolutely. So I can't exactly call what I'm doing podcasting. Maybe audio files is a more accurate story of what I'm doing. And this happened totally by chance. And I'm excited that it happened that way in the second year course that I'm teaching on foundations of communication theories and methods. So it's a 6-unit course, and we're supposed to meet twice a week, but we meet once in person, and the other meeting I pre-record lectures and I upload on Avenue to Learn. That has been interesting. So I went through a process of deciding which content I would pre-record and which content I would deliver in person. From my observations, I've not done empirical research on this, but I feel like students are not feeling the full weight of the 6-unit course on them. Imagine coming to campus 3 times for one course, twice for lectures, and once for tutorials. But now you're only coming twice. For me, I almost get the sense in the room that it is lighter. And the attendance for the classes, I teach this class on a Friday afternoon, yay for me, but students attend. Part of it, I think, is taking away, quote and unquote, the burden of coming twice. So if you're coming once, then it's not too onerous on students to do that.
Thank you. No, it actually bridges the gap between that online, in-person environment. So you're doing kind of like a hybrid type style teaching.
Absolutely, yes.
Which is, it seems to be working.
Well, and so to follow up on that, could you tell us a little bit more about the structure of those audio files or the length of them, and a little bit more about the production that you put into it?
Absolutely. So I try to be as low tech as possible. So it's literally taking the PowerPoint slides that I have and I put audio on each of those files. And on my laptop, I don't need to attach a microphone. The computer microphone is clear enough. If you want to be fancy, I guess, and you want the sound to be crisp, I guess you could attach a microphone, but I don't, and it seems to work well. I record each slide in turn. I record the audio for each slide in turn so that I'm not pressured to do everything in one go. So I see, normally on my lecture slides, I have these prompts. When I look at the content on a lecture slide, then I just speak to them in a very conversational, descriptive manner. And if I feel like I need to do another take, I just retake that particular slide, then save it. I move on to the next slide. And normally I have the slide deck. It has about 30 slides, and it works out to about 20 minutes. That goes back to the initial question that you asked. I think 20 minutes compared to students coming and sitting in a lecture for 2 hours, that gives the sense of, oh, this course is manageable. I'm still delivering a 6-unit course material, but one of the 2 classes is not as long, it's not as intensive as the other one, is the in-person one. And also, audio recordings gives the flexibility for students to listen to these podcasts, whatever they are doing. They don't need to do it immediately. They don't need to be listening to them immediately. They can be doing other chores, traveling, commuting, and be listening. So in terms of the length, they are normally between 20 and 30 minutes maximum, no longer than that. And it's really, as I said, audio on these PowerPoint slides. I guess I could have been much more creative, but I think it is serving the purpose that I'm intending to do with these pre-recorded lectures.
And while you were doing that, did you find any challenges to either to making the files or deciding how to incorporate this technology, or like access to or understanding the technology? I mean, I guess coming from someone like yourself who is a digital storyteller expert, you already had skills way beyond anything you would need to put together an audio recording for your class. But even from your standpoint, did you have any challenges or barriers to putting this together?
Not really, no. I think what the internet has done, YouTube in particular has done, is to have tutorials that teach people to do absolutely anything in the world. So part of it, because I had not done it before, I just went on YouTube and I just looked up how to put audio on PowerPoint presentations, and it was pretty straightforward. I think before one does it, you might, if you're not, somebody who enjoys experimenting with technologies and recording, it might feel daunting that, oh my goodness, where do I even begin? But really, I think one can start with what you already have. You have a laptop, you have a PowerPoint, the slide deck, the PowerPoint presentation is already there, and you can just, it's really looking up how to do it. So I think if one hears you pre-recordings, it is tempting to think about all these complicated ways of how you do it. How do you put music under? How do you, I think that is the bonus if you're able to put music and make it fancy. But what you really want is just to have a recording on a lecture, a slide of lecture slides, and that is what you need. So anyone actually can do it, right? If you've got a laptop and you've got a willingness to try out things, it is doable. I think the biggest hurdle really is to go over this temptation that, oh my goodness, I can't do this, or this is too complicated, I'm not technical enough. And COVID actually showed all of us that we can do stuff online, right? So
thanks for that. Yeah, that optimism is, I think we need that sometimes. Well, all the time, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really. Yeah. We've heard from some professors that are very reluctant to incorporate things like podcast or recorded portions of their classes. And I think that for some people, it goes beyond the sort of technical limitations or the sort of fear or the feeling like we've always having to learn more and do more, and it's more work. But I think that there's there's other critiques, I think, that some folks have. And I was wondering if you have been a part of conversations where you've had colleagues expressing some concerns or hesitation, or even, downright opposition to this kind of work. And if you wanted to share any thoughts on kind of those kind of arguments.
I've spoken to colleagues, and especially in the context of COVID, and two major pushbacks for this kind of doing lectures is really, it's more work. This is adding work to already what I'm doing and so on. In my experience, actually coming and teaching in person twice is more work than coming and teaching in person once and pre-recording the other. And I only spend maximum an hour doing the pre-recording. Whereas if I was coming to campus to teach in person, I would need more than an hour, the travel time, the delivery time, and I would need all sorts of, I need to be present in there. Whereas if you record, then it's up there. So in my experience, other people may experience this as more work, and I'm not even discounting that. But in my experience, I found that pre-recording part of the class is actually less work for me. The other critique is that if lectures are available online, students don't come to class. And, we might as well have the university become a distance learning institution. true. Students don't come to class if it's already pre-recorded, then what's the point? But I think instructors can be creative in terms of how they think about podcasts. So yes, you can have the pre-recording, but then use lecture time, in-person time for engaging students in group exercises, in them speaking, watching something, engaging with that. And you can give an incentive for coming to class as part of your participation is robbed with coming to class and engaging, so that you're not using time going through the material and it's you just talking at the students. And I think that can be draining for students, especially if it's a Friday afternoon. So you can, yes, I think if you put everything online, definitely what will be the motivation for coming to class? If I was a student, I'll cut my losses. I'll just be like, okay, I'll save transport money. I won't go to that class. The content is already there. Why do it? But instructors need to be a little bit creative in terms of, how they use this time in the class. So those are the critiques that I've heard.
Thanks. It's really helpful to get your perspective after you've been working in this model for a while. I'm really excited that your students are showing up to class on Friday afternoon. That's phenomenal. Yeah, especially for a methods and theory course at second year. So that's you're doing something right, Dr. Mudavanhu.
I hope so. I fingers crossed. I'll be teaching this afternoon. I hope I did not just jinx myself.
Oh yeah.
I hope they will show up.
Thanks. I'm sure they will.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I'm going to shift it to a student perspective. During one of our podcast interviews, a student mentioned that lectures can sometimes be hard to understand. They don't understand what the professor is talking about, but they are too reluctant to ask. It could be a large class. They're just intimidated. So they suggest that podcasts would help them understand the context or meanings of certain theories a little bit better. What do you think? Thinking about those difficult conversations, how do you apply digital storytelling to this scenario? Do you see podcasts as a good space to provide extended voice to fill those gaps?
I think universities in general have this tendency of intimidating individuals. Even the most brilliant and brightest of professors, at some point they feel all sorts of inadequacy and they second guess themselves. I don't know what it is about university that makes us feel under pressure to always be the best. You ask the smartest question. If you show signs of not understanding or comprehending, then you feel all sorts of pressures, So it's quite understandable that students would feel intimidated. Maybe it's also they are not extroverts. They don't express themselves freely in class. And that is fine, right? We are all different. The downside is if a student does not understand and they have all these pressures not to ask questions, or they don't just have that outspoken personality, it means they walk away not really, fully comprehending what just happened. And maybe they go to tutorial that is not really explained. I think if you incorporate podcasts into the class, it is an opportunity for students to just rewind, go back and listen to that piece, at their own pace. Takes away that pressure for you to get everything in real time. It allows you the luxury as a student, the privilege to sit and to listen. So it's almost freeing students to be in the present, in the moment.
That's very helpful. Yes, definitely. It's so many layers are involved there, and just, let it be in the moment, just be. So how have your students reacted to your storytelling work or your recorded audio files?
I went on to Avenue to learn to look at students who are actually listening to the audio files. On average, about 50 students are listening, and that is a lot compared to coming to class twice a week. So if 50 students on average are consistently listening to these things on a weekly basis, that is good. And I'm sure the numbers will go up as we get closer to exam time. And compared to maybe getting, 10 students coming to your class, and you are not quite sure whether they are listening to you anyway, even if they are physically present, but at least I can see that, the students are listening. So I'm optimistic that the audio files are a positive thing in the course, and I really cannot wait to see how students have experienced this, because this is the first time doing the pre-recorded and in-person iteration of the course. I'm really super keen to see what students feel about this. That works, then that is how I will do the course moving forward.
What would your dream podcast look like or sound like?
My dream podcast will sound a lot more like Chenjerai Kumanyika's podcast. I love those. I was introduced recently to them by a colleague. Why I like them, they, at least the ones that I've listened, the few that I've listened, the uncivil ones, there is Chenjerai's voice, there is a guest in there, there are sound effects, there is conversation happening, there is a cliffhanger in there. He says something like after the break, and you're kind of holding on to, listening. And the whole content is about, at least uncivil, those voices that were not part of the mainstream. So for me, that element of bringing the voices that are on the margins to the center is fascinating. And I also like how his podcasts get you into this space of drawing on your imagination through the sound effects, through the stories, and so on.
Yeah, making extended connections, immersive, very, very good.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you feel about using a podcast as a scholarly source, a peer-reviewed, in comparison to like a peer-reviewed article or journal?
I think we should, as scholars, normalize doing that, especially podcasts like Uncivil, for example. I think there's got to be room for flexibility. I know the system is rigid. It has to be peer reviewed. It has to be in this kind of journal, and so on and so forth. But I think, yes, you can do that. I mean, you need those peer reviewed things. But I think we should be able to reference podcasts that are credible. Well, credible, what do we mean by credible? Anyone can put anything out there. So that's where the slippery slope begins, right? Because I think Uncivil is credible, but who gets to say that? Who has judged it? So there's got to be ways of us making sure we are referencing podcasts that there's a way of checking whether the content is, we can rely on it, so that we are not, perpetuating dominant myths or things like that. So I think that's an exciting place to be, because it's an interesting challenge for academics to say, okay, what will constitute a credible podcast to reference in an article?
Thank you. Yes, that is a challenge. It's something to look into, maybe on another project.
Absolutely.
But a great idea, since we are in the digital age. So it's just another venue just to get that extended voice.
If, as instructors, we need to begin to be much more creative and adventurous. And some of those assignments, we allow students to do podcasts, to do digital stories, photo voice stories, and so on. Students have got different ways of expressing themselves. And the mainstream way of writing assignments is, it looks easiest in terms of grading, but is it always the best way for students to express that they understand the content? Maybe doing something as creative and interesting as creating a podcast might be something that will push them to demonstrate in much more creative ways their level of understanding of the content.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I mean, it's sort of interesting how things like granting agencies and university, initiatives focus on community engagement and like challenging the ways that we conceptualize knowledge mobilization and knowledge transfer. And last year, in the second half of the second year course that you're teaching, we were just thinking through that, and how do you, instead of just writing the research report, how do you also create other deliverables? Like what is it like to create a podcast versus an ArcGIS piece versus an infographic versus a conference presentation, and how, just, and like you said earlier, in terms of thinking about how your students can use their digital storytelling skills in the future, that I think that, if we're also committed to experiential learning, like having students also get excited about those skills that they're building and competencies through research and voice and technology and process are things that are definitely, applicable to different classes, different workplaces, and, they're community projects that they're engaged in, or their activism. So I think it's really exciting times.
I agree. Yes. Yeah.
So I'm going to wrap things up. So final thoughts, biggest takeaway you hope listeners to learn?
I think openness to trying out things, experimenting, giving yourself the liberty to go on YouTube, teach yourself skills on how to do podcasting, how to do audio recording, I think is important.
One more thing, signature question. What are your favorite podcasts you like to listen to?
I've already given Away Uncivil by Chenjerai Kumanyika. I think he does an absolutely fantastic job in that podcast.
Yeah, I join you on that. It's super interesting, and like you said, the production quality is amazing. Absolutely. Highly recommended.
Oh, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I highly recommend it.
Yeah.
And we're not being paid by Chenjerai to say that.
Thank you for taking the time out of your day to discuss podcasting with us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to just reflect on my own thoughts on the topic. And I think your project is absolutely fantastic. And so well done for doing such an amazing project.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And thanks. Yeah, thanks, Milica, for having me co-host with you today. It was a lot of fun. Thanks. It was great talking with you, Dr. Mudavanhu.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. In summary, we have revealed that podcasts have similar elements to digital storytelling in terms of challenging the traditional media production, the trained journalist, and what information is most important. Bringing in voices from the source, sharing knowledge with communities, and prioritizing ordinary people to tell their stories. Some pushback of having more work is a professor's struggle, and it can be frustrating. However, podcast production can be low-tech and functional in getting your message across to your students. Professors are encouraged to explore their teaching strategy and be innovative and creative, work with their students. That's all for now. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned to our next episode with Dr. Eugenia Żurowski in Humanizing the Professor.